Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Barbara Dawson and I'm director of the gallery, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here today for our symposium, Eyewitness. I'd like to just briefly welcome also our speakers, Dr Maria Maclennan, Suha Nabhan, Dr Isber Sabrine, Giath Taha and Lawrence Abu Hamdan. I'd also like to welcome artist Brian Maguire and our chair of the symposium, Professor Declan McGonagle. Eyewitness Symposium has come about from Brian Maguire's exhibition La Grande Illusion, which is on view here to my left, and the exhibition will be open during lunchtime as well for all of you to view. It's an ongoing document. Brian Maguire's work has been an interrogation and an exploration of ongoing violence and injustices that he has encountered across the globe. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but the exhibition and the work brings out not just obvious, and it's not just black and white. He also reveals the complexities between those who perpetrate the crimes and the victims. It also the circumstances which recreate the social environment which allows for such atrocities to happen. And it is an enduring document in an age of instant reportage and digital erasure. So these documents will be here for us in enduring document of what has happened and cannot be erased as in newspapers and others. It is true that an exhibition or a painting can't stop a war or can't stop a bomb, but what it has done is allowed us to bring the debate forward, and hence we have this symposium, Eyewitness. Just as Brian has witnessed all of these events himself, engaging with communities, our speakers today are going to extend that debate. It is true we may not be able to do much, but speaking out also may find us a path to reconciliation, which is what we all desire. And so thank you very much for coming this morning. My co-curator of the exhibition, Michael Dempsey, is going to just briefly give you a background to the exhibition. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Barbara. I just made a few notes last night of some of the ideas that came to me during the development of the exhibition, and I was just saying to Suha this morning there, exhibitions like this take a long time, and the formation of this exhibition actually took about 5 years. So it's knowing the artist, but then also trying to come to grips with the nature of the work and then how best to present it. So when the work we do becomes a means of mere survival, rather than one of creative fulfillment, we experience what Marx called alienation. Art in its commodification is also wrapped up in this alienation, unless it is an art that occupies a space of difference, a space that is absolutely essential to social political culture of equality. Brian Maguire is such an artist. Critical engagement with the world can be encouraged by curating exhibitions that offer diverse perspectives, alternative histories or marginalized voices. It can disrupt the dominant discourse and encourage critical thinking through our institutional programs. In prompting these questions as cultural producers and consumers, we can reflect on our own roles within these systems. La Grande Illusion develops Brian Maguire's multi-layered overture by transforming the galleries of the Hugh Lane into spaces for action and dialogue, such as what we have today, creating vectors for the themes Maguire so doggedly mines. The exhibition illuminates the many traces of historical violence that connect the contemporary politics of land, history, body, and identity. And one of the quotes we have is we have a lot of wall text. So along with Brian's works and the wonderful paintings, it's contextualized very deeply with the number of wall text that we planned as part of the exhibition, so when you get to visit, you'll see it. This is a quote by George Orwell, which is a favorite of Brian's. The fact is, every war suffers a kind of progressive degradation with every month that it continues, because such things as individual liberty and a truthful press are simply not compatible with military efficiency, which is what we have daily proof of. 6 themes are laid out in a visual narrative, reminding us that art history always reflects structures of dominance. It puts the power inherent by the museum to good use by displacing motifs usually linked to history's victors in favour of other genealogies. The paintings of Brian Maguire play a critical role in critiquing, complementing and providing an alternative to state narratives. And the exhibition offers a space for ideas and emotions that may be overlooked or underrepresented in the fast-paced digital world. So I'd like to now introduce the chair of the symposium, Declan McGonagle.
I'll just start, I think, by congratulating Michael and Barbara for their, and indeed Brian Maguire for producing the work, but for curating the exhibition, and the whole Hugh Lane team for making such a substantial commitment to this body of work and to the values which inform Brian Maguire's painting. It's right that a values-driven practice like Brian's receives this sort of critical attention, and indeed the significant use of the particular series of galleries here, which are right at the centre of this gallery as an institution, and that's, I think, a major part of the commitment to the project. Brian's paintings, while embodying what is known as the Western tradition in painting, at the same time reveal the consequences of that tradition as a set of ideologies at work in the world today. So these paintings are relational. They're in dialogue and in relation to the history of painting itself, but also in relation to the social ideologies which inform the aesthetics of that history and that tradition. So in thinking about today's event, what I am thinking about is the dialectic that is produced within Brian's work, within the exhibition. That dialectic between the history of painting and the societal history that out of which the paintings and the art process emerges. And it's a dialectic between the aesthetic responsibilities and the ethical responsibilities of the art process, in which the viewer can participate. And in thinking about the idea of the viewer and today's event, I'm reminded of the art critic, writer and artist Brian O'Doherty said about the aesthetic disruption of Impressionism, again within the Western tradition, which challenged the viewer literally to ask, where do I stand? Stand too close to an Impressionist painting and the image disappears. And Brian O'Doherty's comment that the first viewers must have had a lot of trouble in actually seeing the picture, because the painting was no longer a passive object, but was giving instructions and forcing the viewer to ask, where do I stand? And this same question of where do I stand can be applied to the experience of Brian Maguire's painting in relation to what the artist is representing and is asking us as viewers to consider. And he does this by deploying both a sort of seductive aesthetics and at the same time gives you an ethical punch in the face. So that question, where do I stand, is key, it seems to me, today on all societal levels and within all sectors. Because sometimes the reality is so much and the odds so stacked against empathy, which I would argue is the purpose of art, that all one can do is bear witness. Which brings us to the different kinds of witnessing which we're discussing today. And I'd like now to introduce the first speaker, Dr Maria Maclennan, a lecturer in jewellery and silversmithing at the University of Edinburgh, and is the world's first forensic jeweller. She provides analysis of the role of objects, including jewellery, from human remains across a variety of forensic and criminal contexts. And Maria is talking today about the resurrection of migrant voices. Maria.
going to move that down a little bit. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes, great, thank you. I would like to say thank you so much to everybody at the Hugh Lane Gallery for inviting me today, and I genuinely mean it when I say it's a pleasure to be here. I'm very much looking forward to listening to all of the other speakers and all of the wonderful work, as well as obviously the La Grande Illusion by Brian Maguire. And thanks must also go to all of you for coming along today. So, as was mentioned, my name's Maria. I'm a senior lecturer at Edinburgh College of Art, which is part of the University of Edinburgh in Bonnie, Scotland. So I'm a jewellery designer. I'm a craft practitioner by trade. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a police officer, although I do work in that kind of space very collaboratively, very interdisciplinary with forensic pathologists, forensic anthropologists, police and investigative agencies around the globe. So the project today that I'm going to talk about is entitled Identifying the Displaced. It's a multidisciplinary and international project in collaboration with forensic pathologists in Greece, as well as human remains experts and migrant communities themselves. So the project is part academic, it's part humanitarian, and it's part community engagement as well. So I'm going to start just by giving you a little bit of brief context. This is kind of my life story on a slide, just to kind of contextualize the work, because in some ways it is a little bit unusual, I suppose. And you know, it's very lovely to hear these kind of claims that I'm the world's first, world's only forensic jeweler, but it's actually a lot of rubbish. And I did, as I say, trained as a bench jeweler, so I was designing and making jewellery, and actually a lot of the jewellery I made when I first graduated as a student was stolen. So they kind of took from me, I felt, the hundreds of hours of labour, of energy and emotion that I'd invested into the creation of these artefacts. And you know, when I reported them stolen, you know, the police could not be less interested. But for me, it was a form of trauma, and you know, spite can be a curiously motivating factor. So I actually decided to start to investigate the traceability of objects, the kind of emotional attachment people have to them, and how we can potentially utilise objects in different criminal and forensic contexts. So I actually did my PhD in exploring the potential of jewellery and other personal effects as forms of evidence, of intelligence, of communicators of identity. And then I actually went on and spent about 8 years with the Forensic Services Division of the Police Service in Scotland. I'm an academic now, but I still consult a lot on different cases. I do a lot of projects with investigative agencies, but the work I always do is very much collaborative. It always puts people at the heart and centre. So it was a huge kind of learning curve for me as somebody who went to art college to then suddenly be transported to mortuaries all across the world, to disaster zones all around the world, to be kind of participating in family liaison with the next of kin and the relatives of those that have lost their lives. So it's been a real learning curve, but I very much do believe in the themes we're going to be discussing today: the power of art, the power of craft, the power of storytelling, to kind of give back visibility, to give back a voice and an identity to those who can no longer speak for themselves. So, as I say, this kind of title is not really true. It's sort of the idea, I suppose, that jewellery design and forensic science can be brought together is really innovative. It's a bit CSI. So I think I can understand where this attention has come from, this kind of fascination. I think objects, jewellery, is something we can all relate to in some way. We all have those stories. It was gifted to me by my grandmother. It was passed down through the generations. But as I say, it's really just not the case, because jewellery is a great prime example of an object, of an artefact that has really extensive links and associations to identity, to the human body, and also to death through time, place, and space. So we have these artifacts that can kind of indicate membership, status, power or rank within societies or organizations. Here we have some catacomb saints. This fellow here, this skeleton kind of draped with all these fabulous jewels that kind of tells us something about how important he was, the fact he was buried with these artifacts. And we see that in many cultures. The ancient Egyptians used to bury their dead with protective amulets and talisman, so they would have a safe passage to the afterlife. So again, we see that all the time throughout history. And in the next example, archaeologists, anthropologists have been digging up material culture that kind of continues to inform us about our ancestors. How advanced was that civilization? What kind of tools and techniques and materials were they using at the time? When did they start to participate in cultures we would recognize? So archaeologists get very excited when they find things like jewellery and pottery because they don't really have a value that isn't social. We can't really eat our jewellery. It doesn't really clothe us or keep us warm. It doesn't really provide us with shelter. So it really has a value that's inherently social, and we can learn so much about people and societies and civilizations through it. So the middle example is some of the earliest recovered jewellery is around about 130,000 years old, but we're continually finding new evidence that pushes that date back. So again, actually what we have here is material culture and artifacts, a notion, and the act of crafting and wearing a piece of jewellery, a notion far older than any science, and certainly any forensic science that we have today. And finally, of course, something I'm sure we can all relate to on some level is that very personal, that sentimental, that familial connection with people, with places, with relationships, with memories, with stories, with emotions, with identities. So jewellery, I think partly because of its close proximity to the body, and also the fact that we kind of pour our hearts and our emotions and our memories into these little objects. They kind of become vessels and microcosms for all of human experience. So if my slides may have jumped around a little bit, I do apologise, but I hope you can still get a sense of what I'm talking about. Moving into that forensic and that human identification context, as many of you I'm sure will know, we generally have our three what we call primary methods of establishing identity, reliable, indisputable forms of identity on which we can base that someone is who we presume them to be, only if one is present, so DNA, fingerprints, and odontology, our teeth. So I work much more in the space of secondary identifiers. So that's almost everything else. So that's a really, really vast landscape. And just as a couple of examples, we have personal effects. That's my main area. So any objects, artifacts, clothing, possessions that we wear, that we carry with us, that we hold, that we use or interact with in our daily lives. And also a little bit of body modifications. You can maybe tell that's something I have a personal interest myself, but again, it's an extension of how we express and communicate our identities and who we are as people. So there are many, many kinds of secondary identifiers, but personal effects and specifically jewellery is the area in which I operate. So in search of a definition, personal effects collectively describe the inanimate objects or belongings of an individual which are located on or near to their person at the time of an incident. So that's generally what we're talking about when we're talking about personal effects. Now, I'm happy to share the slides if anyone would like, so please don't worry about trying to read all the little bits, but generally, we can get a flavour of maybe some of the different categories or themes that we're talking about here. So this was a little research study I did last year in the kind of frequency and occurrence of different objects and items. So we have jewellery, kind of 68%, and that could be earrings, rings, necklaces, watches. But actually the highest one that kind of came out highest was non-individual non-intentional modification. So actually, when we're thinking about birthmarks, scars, prostheses, all of these things, we sort of play around with an interesting area there, that they're kind of part of our body. They're a sort of intermediary that merges the biological parameters and our biometrics with objects. So a lot of these items are serial numbered, they're traceable, but they also are unique and personal to us. So non-intentional modifications, body modifications, cosmetic enhancements. So there's all sorts of ways that we curate our appearance and our identity that can be really, really useful in kind of individualizing us. So you may recognize this face, but one of the things that is really, really useful is what we call intentional alteration of the body. So that can be defined as a temporary or permanent, deliberate modification. So that could be something like tattoos or piercings, but it could also be cosmetic makeup, the way we style our hair, whether we dye our hair, the way we trim our facial hair. But you know, me as an example, I always think how easy versus how difficult would it be to identify me. You know, I'm probably not going to get away with committing any crimes anytime soon. But equally, if you were to find my skull or my human remains, you may be able to reconstruct my face. You may be able to get a little bit closer to what I looked like. But the bones have no business to speak of the wardrobe. So my remains may not tell you that I had dyed my hair. I'm not a natural blonde, in case anyone was wondering. My remains may not tell you that I had a tattoo. They may not tell you that I had, you know, maybe had a couple of bits of work done. So it's really, really useful, but it can also present lots and lots of challenges and difficulties, the way that we kind of experiment with ourselves. So I'm going to move now into talking about the project itself and how these kind of themes, this context, this area that I've been working in for the last few years is being applied to the migration context. Again, the slides have jumped around a little bit, but this was really just to give you an impression of actually how vast this area is. And I think even when I started working in this space, I thought, well, how much information really can something small like jewellery tell us? How many applications and areas are there really for this kind of information? And actually, I found that there are many. It really kind of crops up in relation to any forensic or criminal or humanitarian theme that we come across. So we have the kind of traditional crimes, if you like. We have jewellery theft, robbery, burglary, kind of switch outs where we have a lot of, you know, very clever, intelligent criminals, you know, swapping out when the jewellery industry personnel are not looking. And a lot of these kinds of pieces can be used to contribute to other more significant crimes, money laundering, drug trafficking. Jewellery is a really, really great way of transporting wealth inconspicuously across borders. So it's small, it's portable, it's easy to conceal around the body. It's perfectly legal to own, unlike maybe huge wads of cash or lots of drugs. So it's actually being used more and more to fund acts of terrorism and war, and actually transport this sort of illicit money across borders. It's also used a lot in mass fatalities, which we'll talk a little bit about today. So identifying victims of mass fatalities, mass disasters, also the kind of placement or dispersal of objects at crime scenes. That can give us sort of circumstantial or narrative evidence as well. It can even be kind of used as a physical repository for evidence. So think of the objects that you maybe wear and hold and interact with every day. Your toothbrushes, if you all brushed your teeth this morning, full of your DNA. Everything you've kind of touched and interacted with today, your fingerprints, your DNA, your skin cells. So again, these little objects literally can identify us from things like physical swabs. And with jewellery being something that we maybe wear every day, we maybe never take off, things like our wedding rings, actually that can be a really, really good repository. So all the gunk that kind of builds up in your jewellery that generally we advise you as jewellery personnel to keep clean, from a forensic perspective, that's actually very, very valuable. So there's all sorts of other themes, use in archaeological cases, and actually some slightly more sinister ones where we have a lot of examples of jewellery and objects actually being weaponised. So actually either deliberately or accidentally being cruelly kind of weaponised by perpetrators and actually being responsible as the cause of death itself. We also have a lot of examples of personal effects being used in the storage or disposal of human remains, so bags, sheets, suitcases, this kind of thing as well. And there are also a lot of applications in forensic art and forensic psychology if we're interviewing an eyewitness and the kind of, unique things they remember about a person. We often ask them about what did their nose look like, what did their jaw look like, what did their face shape look like. But actually, I always think, well, maybe the first thing someone might remember about me isn't the shape of my nose. Maybe it's the fact I have a massive tattoo on my head. Maybe it's the fact I had a really bright top or really distinctive, clothing. So there's a lot of use there too, but it's really quite a massive field with lots of applications. But of course, what we're going to talk about is migrant disaster victim identification, so identification of people on the move. So the Identifying the Displaced project, as I mentioned, is an academic project partly, myself at the University of Edinburgh, but it's also very much collaborative. So I've been working for a number of years now, about four years, with the forensic mortuary at Alexandroupoli General Hospital, which is the largest teaching hospital and forensic mortuary in the north of Greece, in the Evros region. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how the project kind of came about and focus on our methodology and how these objects can act as eyewitnesses, really. I often think these objects are like the silent witness in an investigation. It physically accompanied that person through that experience. It was with them at the end. It knows what happened, but it can't talk. Or we haven't created the language to be able to listen, to hear that object speak yet. So it was these kinds of themes we were tapping into. So I've been working with the pathologist, the chief forensic pathologist at the mortuary in Alexandroupoli for a number of years. Because of the location of the mortuary is very close to the Greek-Turkish border, the pathologist has been mostly dealing with migrant deaths for the last 20 years. And he's been collecting, for lack of a better word, all of the objects, all of the personal effects that these individuals carried with them on their journey. So I reached out to him and I said, well, I do this kind of work. Is there something we could do here together? What do you do with these objects? Why are you keeping them? And he said that he didn't know, but it felt like the right thing to do. So this is how the project kind of came about. So we've been building a catalogue, if that's the right word, and we have more than 100 unidentified and some identified now migrants, and over 500 objects that they've been carrying on their journeys. And the idea is that we wanted to create something that would give back visibility, give back voice, give back autonomy, identity, and humanity to these individuals who can no longer speak for themselves. So we wanted to use craft, art, design, storytelling, and narrative to do that. So it was very interdisciplinary in the sense we were working with forensic and police and autopsy data, as well as these more softer, emotive approaches. So our story begins in Evros, and very sadly, that's often where these individual stories end. So this is the River of Death, as it's become not so affectionately known. It's a particularly treacherous border crossing that separates the north of Greece and Turkey. It's a key entry point, therefore, into Europe. And so we see many, many individuals and people on the move crossing this border, coming from a lot of places, but we have lots of individuals from North Africa, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran. So many, many, many individuals, but generally we see individuals from these places. So the river, in first glance, doesn't seem as deathly or as treacherous, and there is these sort of very scary borders that have been put up, border patrols, border guards. Evros is a military zone, and you can feel that. You can feel that in the air, in the atmosphere when you're walking around. There's a very, very high presence, and nobody can really get close to the border. It's very sort of secretive. So many people on the move who lose their lives in and around the Evros region. Many of them do die from drowning, but we also have individuals who die from hypothermia. We have individuals that try to avoid the river and go through the mountains and also die from various causes, exhaustion, excuse me, they maybe die from freezing to death. And we also lost a lot of migrant lives in the wildfires in Greece in 2003. But again, these statistics are unfortunately always out of date, but of the approximately 550 deaths in the region since 2002, which is really only when we started recording statistics, so the number is far, far higher, sadly, over 60% remain unidentified. They still have no name, no identity, their families don't know where they are, and they therefore have no means through which to narrate their own stories. And as we know, there's a great sense of othering that goes on with migrant communities. Oh, it's happening over there, it's this homogenous group, we don't know or care, it's not happening to me. So this is what we wanted to do. We wanted to try and combat that a little and humanize these individuals and actually use these objects as a way of facilitating that kind of humanity. So we deal with a lot of decomposed human remains, very sadly. We're very much in a position where DNA is not possible because we don't often know who the individuals are or where they're coming from. It's very difficult to get ante-mortem data from families and next of kin. So it's very, very difficult to do. And sadly, I think it's different around every part of the world, but in Greece, most migrant bodies are kept for a maximum of 3 years. But because of the amount of storage, the facilities that's available, sometimes that's a lot shorter. And most of them, therefore, are buried in unmarked graves. So there are many, many graveyards like this all across, I'm sure, Europe, but this again is the north of Greece, and you can see these kind of white stones. They've been bleached white by the sun, and initially the kind of evidence number, the number that these people have been assigned or reduced to was written on these in marker pen, and of course the sun bleached it away. So we lose sight of who is whom and where they're buried, and that any potential we might have to identify them is sort of lost. So it leaves us with a very small window of opportunity to try and do this work. And sadly, when we've been going through all of the objects collected over the last few years, we've found lots of information that could have identified these individuals. But now we don't know where they're buried. So we have a number of challenges and problems there. So I'm going to talk through our kind of approach, our methodology. I'll show you some of the objects and tell you a little bit about what we've been doing. So these are real examples. I'm not going to show you any human remains, don't worry, and there's certain things I can't tell you or show you, but what I will show you are real objects recovered with the bodies of real people who sadly lost their lives along the River Evros. So I should have put this at the beginning, apologies. This is a little flavour into the project team firstly, so there's me in the middle. So as I say, my perspective is really the objects as evidence. We then have Dr Jan Bikker here, the very tall Dutch chap. So Jan used to work with the International Committee for the Red Cross and is a humanitarian expert. He is an expert in human remains, and he runs a charity now based out of Athens called the Transnational Platform for Forensic Assistance, and they have a particular initiative dedicated to identifying missing migrants. So he does a lot of the family liaison work. He reaches out to the relatives, those looking for their families and their loved ones, and he does a lot of that kind of liaison. So it's a non-government organisation that he runs, so it sort of acts as an intermediary between the authorities and migrant communities, because very often there is a distrust, and quite rightly so, between those groups. We then have Pavlos over on the right, Professor Pavlos Pavlidis. So Pavlos is the one that runs the forensic mortuary. He's the chief forensic pathologist, so he deals with the autopsies and the migrant bodies themselves. We've also been working with other artists, designers and creatives throughout the project. We've been working with sound engineers, with documentary filmmakers. So Harry Lawson, who's not pictured, has been following us as we do this work, and we do have a short documentary that I'm going to play for you at the end of the talk. And I've put at the bottom, hopefully all of you, because the nature of this project is really about community engagement. Everyone can help with this, and I'll tell you more about that. So, this is what we see when we first arrive at the mortuary. These are the items as they come into us in little plastic bags. They're put in these little plastic bags by the police, and usually they have a little sticker or a number on them. And then they're popped in a box, and there's no sense of kind of coordination or organisation. Very often they're also removed from the bodies and popped to one side, and the kind of connection there between whether these artefacts being recovered with potentially specific people in particular ways and places could be informative. So for example, removing a SIM card or removing a memory card from a mobile phone or a camera, removing that camera from the body, we've lost that potential for that story. Okay. So the first thing that we did was to kind of sort and organise, and there's not personal effects recovered with everybody, and we were also dealing with a lot of items from over 20 years. So I think the earliest items we have are from 2002 right up until this year. So trying to kind of create some sort of timeline, organise them in a way that would make a little bit more sense. Photography is a huge part of what we do. It's really, really important for us to document the items in situ with the bodies as they're found, in the mortuary when they come into us, and then again when they've kind of been placed in these bags. But we also need to document them at each stage of the process. That kind of chain of evidence is really important. So we photograph them in the bags. Some people are recovered with multiple effects. So this is all belonging to one individual. We can see some jewellery, some glasses, some cards, some bits of paper here. We often have things like this. We have phone numbers, names, dates, numbers that are kind of written on different objects. A lot of things have serial numbers or maybe engravings, so things that are really highly traceable potentially or very personal. We then photograph each item individually, and a lot of the time things are very sadly commingled with human remains, so we often need to clean and dry these items, but we have to do that after the original photography. So we'll photograph everything first, we'll clean and dry, and then we'll re-photograph it again. Any detail is really, really important too. So if we notice any marks, engravings, inscriptions, we try to zoom in and capture that. This is an example of some Turkish worry beads, but they're very common across different parts of the world as well. They're very tactile objects. They're generally used by men, but not always. They kind of hold them and turn them around in their hands as a sort of tactile object to play around with. It's also very important for us to take measurements because that could relate to how, large or small or a person was. Have they had something personally made for them? Has it been adjusted for their body? So it's really important for us to look at size as well. We then generally do more of a forensic examination, so we get a lot of wallets and kind of purses and things like that also contain lots of other information, and very often that's congealed, it's all stuck together with mud or water or mildew, so we have to be very, very careful when we're opening these things. But sadly, we actually, in doing our examinations, we found a lot of extra evidence in some of these items that wasn't found the first time around. And some of these items have been in storage for years. So it does make you think if we could find that, if the knowledge was there, if we'd been able to do this work a bit sooner, might we have been able to identify some of these individuals. So in doing my kind of work, I use a lot of jewellery, appraisal, gemological equipment. This is my trusty little 10 times magnification loop that I use to sort of look at details. But very sadly, that's about as good as it gets in these conditions. We can't bring a fully equipped gemological lab over to a mortuary in rural Greece. It's a voluntary project, so nobody really has the kind of time, money or resources. So we do have to try and do what we can with what's available. But even we found kind of the prescriptions in glasses, the kind of brand labels or markings, the serial numbers on different SIM cards or items, all of these little details where we can potentially phone the manufacturer, reach out to the phone company, all of these extra little avenues that maybe weren't explored at the time. And of course, hallmarks, engravings, serial numbers are very, very traceable. So we can get a sense of sometimes what the material was made from, where it was made, manufactured, and potentially if it's a personal design, who bought it, who wore it, who owned it, who the victim was. So I'm maybe running a little bit over, so I'm going to skip through some of this quite quickly. Usually when I do these talks, I go into a lot more detail about the tools and techniques that we use. But the main premise, as I've said, is that there's all these little secret clues in objects. And like anything, unless you have the correctly kind of attuned ear or eye, it's like any language. You need to be able to kind of read, understand, and translate that. So a lot of the work has been trying to upskill, trying to create tools and resources for the pathologists, for the prosecutors, for migrant communities themselves, so that they can kind of be more aware of the power of these items. So again, we've developed kind of different forms of training about how they can kind of photograph, handle, take swabs, search for hallmarks, look at kind of more complicated aspects such as gemstones. And what we've done with most of the objects now is put them into long-term storage, so they will always remain at the mortuary in case we can identify individuals or families want to take these objects back. One very simple but very important thing is transferring them into paper bags, because that actually absorbs a lot of the moisture. And sadly, with the items having been held in plastic bags for many years, there was a lot of mold and mildew and a lot of rust, and a lot of them had disintegrated, so we lost potential data and information. So they're there in the mortuary in long-term storage. Many countries around the world have different policies and laws about how long items can be retained for, but Pavlos, our partner, has said that he will always retain them. He will never do anything with them, never give them away. We also work with translators to, create the catalogue. So what we've done is photograph every item. We translated hundreds of police autopsy reports, hundreds and hundreds of evidence that was all written in Greek. And what we did was rewrite them in first-person narratives so that the individuals could sort of speak for themselves. So I'm going to go through a couple of these now. I was found on the 28th of November 2019 at around 1:10 by a military patrol of the 16th, I'm not going to try and pronounce that division, inside a makeshift grave, a few metres from the river Evros, 3 kilometres southwest of the village of Petrides. I may have died within 6 months before I was found. According to news sources, it is alleged that I was buried by fellow migrants that were either part of my group or a group that may have stumbled upon me after crossing the Evros River. I am still unidentified. I was found floating in the water of the River Evros on the 15th of May 2019 at 5 p.m. in a tributary west of the river at the height of Monastiraki. I probably died 15 days before I was found. I am still unidentified and I died of drowning. The other thing that we did, for lack of a better word, we actually worked with migrants who had successfully made the journeys, and we were actually working with communities to try and understand their journeys, their perils. So we did these kind of talking heads interviews, and we asked them about some of the objects that they brought with them and why they chose certain objects. And it was usually for protective reasons, for personal, sentimental reasons, but there was also some religious and cultural considerations, but practical things like SIM cards as well. So when they got to their destination, they could phone home. We also did some workshops with stakeholders because it was very important that whatever we designed in terms of a catalogue or database was actually useful and had the kind of functionality and features that pathologists would use. But we also have opened the database to migrant families so they can actually search for their loved ones. They can look through the database and see if they recognise anything. So we've done a lot of work with different stakeholders. But we often have many, many, many challenges, and we have been able to identify many individuals from this approach, which is wonderful, but there's often a lot of really difficult cases. Does anyone know what this is? No? So this is a baby's dummy. So unfortunately, we do come across really difficult cases, really difficult kind of objects and stories. This is an identified individual, so I won't talk too much about, but we do have a lot of identified cases. One of the biggest challenges isn't actually in using the objects at all. So I'm going to kind of end with this little story. We were seeing a lot of these kinds of objects, and we didn't really know what they were. So we were doing a little bit of research. They were coming up time and time again, but most of them were sort of stitched all the way around, these little triangular leather pouches. And this one was a little bit different because it had this little button, this little popper. So what we'd found online actually was that they were probably a form of Tawiz amulet, very popular in kind of Arabic countries and communities, probably containing a little piece of parchment or scripture, a religious prayer, a spell, or a protective element. And we didn't therefore open any of them because we didn't feel that was for us to do. So even though some of these items might have contained additional information, it wasn't for us to kind of tamper with that sort of very, very important cultural and religious belief system. In this case, we received permission from the pathologist and the local prosecutor because it almost invites you in. You know, it kind of has that ability to open it. So again, this had been kind of sitting in storage for a number of years, and when we opened it, we found very carefully wrapped in cling film some sort of parchment. When we unravelled it, there were 2 or 3 different pieces of paper in there altogether, so we have a lot of text that we worked with translators to translate. And in this particular case, this talks about protection to the wearer, offering the person who carries or holds it protection. Inside that, we then found another little item wrapped up in cling film, likely to protect from the harsh waters. And inside that, we found a number of SIM cards and memory cards that might have been held in, say, mobile phones or cameras. Now, I can't tell you or show you too much, but a 32 gigabyte memory card, we found hundreds of photos, videos, medical records, documents. All of those items had metadata, so it told us where and when the item was taken. We also had a lot of selfies, which allowed us to compare to the individual in the mortuary. And the last, most recent selfie we found, the individual was wearing this cord. They had a blue hat and a particular jumper and some trainers, and that was what they were wearing when we found them. We also managed to find their social media accounts, and the last post they made said that they were going on a very important journey and they were asking for people to wish them good luck. And they didn't post ever since. So very, very sadly, we were actually able to reach out using Jan Bicker, our kind of contact with families. We put some appeals out on Afghan radio. This individual was from rural Afghanistan. And we actually did manage to locate the families. But the families chose not to believe that this was their loved one. They did not want to come to Greece to give a DNA sample. They wanted to believe that their individual was safe and well working in Turkey, where he told them he'd gone. So even where we can kind of complete and fulfill this process, I'm just going to skip through this. This is just about the challenges. As again, I can send you the slides if you want. But that is probably the main challenge, is even in spite of all the problems and difficulties we have, even where we do everything right and have the best outcome we could hope for, it's not always something that we can do. We can't convince families to want to come forward. So the screen is flashing at me, so I've run out of time, but what I wanted to kind of end on was just to say the importance of not only working with migrant communities and stakeholders, but we wanted to take all these visual narrative approaches, all of these stories, and share them with the wider public. So we've been doing a lot of exhibitions and events. We've been gathering little feedback cards from people. We're also kind of contributing to a larger European Commission project that's since come out of some of this work. So this is a kind of international project looking to establish worldwide standards and processes in migrant disaster victim identification. So again, we're always looking for members and participants to help us with that. And we have also, been on location in Greece. I mentioned we worked with a documentary filmmaker. We also worked with a kind of couple of media outlets who've followed us around and recorded the project. So we do have some radio shows, some images, some videos. So I'm very happy to share with you any of these resources. And of course, the thing that I've run out of time to show you, but maybe we can look at it another time, was the film that we've produced to kind of film all of this work. So that was launched by Crack magazine last year officially. It is now in the public domain, so I can share that with you. And what I was going to do here, if I hadn't run out of time, was kind of thank you a little bit prematurely and then play you the film. But the film is about 10 minutes long, so I think I'll leave it there for now, and then if anybody would like to watch it, I'm very happy to kind of share the link. I usually don't like to say too much about it and let you all just decide for yourselves anyway, so please do come if you would like to get the link for that. Other than that, just to say thank you all so very much for listening, and if you would like, the link to the database is identifyingthedisplaced.com. The website is open. The database is behind a sort of restricted area, but all it is a simple case of signing up with your details, and you can browse all of the items there because we've had a lot of identification results from community engagement, people of different backgrounds and cultures who have recognised items and been able to kind of help us out. So all of you can help contribute to the work too. So thank you very, very much, and I look forward to speaking to you. Thank you.